All right, so moving right along here, we're now going to move into some different things. We talked about farmers going there, etc. Now, the next thing we have here is something called dilemma of the farmer. And so we have this woman here. She probably doesn't have much. And so what is the dilemma of the farmer? Dilemma of the farmer is simply, hey, I don't have enough money. So logic would dictate if I don't have money, I need to plant more crops to make more money, correct? The problem with that, however, is if you have a saturation or a lot of something in the market, it becomes less valuable. And so you make less money. And so that's the dilemma of the farmer, that for all their hard work and doing these things, they're making less money. It exists today. We call it the dilemma of the middle class. People getting 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet. But as they do and they make more money, they pay more income taxes, and so they're not really making much more money. But it's existed for a long time. So the dilemma of the farmer is the fact that they have these things. And so what are they upset about? They're upset about the taxation by the railroads. That the railroads are basically using these things, and so they come up with a thing, and a guy named Mr. Munn will decide to sue the state of Illinois. And so here's what happened in Munn versus Illinois, okay? In Munn versus Illinois, go back to this. In Munn versus Illinois, they basically decided that a state can tell how much you can deal with corporate rates in agriculture. It basically said you could regulate certain businesses within the state borders, and that included railroads. It was an important case because it was public regulation of a private enterprise or a private business. And so we're basically moving away from laissez-faire here. Laissez-faire, we'll get into next chapter. It means hands off, let them do what they want. And we're going to move into a regulatory society. So they basically told them what they could and could not do. Now, the problem with that is that if you have more money, there leads a horrible thing called inflation. And so if everyone has money, everything costs more. And so that's inflation. Inflation is basically where your prices increase, but your wages and your salary do not. And this happens when people have money. Now, the United States at this time was based on a standard, and we're still based on this. We went away for it for a little while, but it's called the gold standard. If you've seen The Wizard of Oz, this is the yellow brick road, and there's an analogy there, and we'll look at that later on. But in short, the gold standard basically means that our financial system of banking is based off gold. We have to base it. So that little piece of paper you have in your pocket should represent how much gold we have in the economy. If it doesn't, that's called deflation, and that's a bad thing. Okay, and we'll talk about that. Now, again, the farmers are upset about this. And so a group of farmers get together, and they will form what are called grangers, right? And so what the heck is a granger? Well, if you're in Spanish class, you've maybe heard the word granja. And a granja is a farm. It comes from the Latin grange, grangers, right? Grangers are farmers. That's all they are. They're agrarians, they're farmers, they're whatever you want to call them, okay? So these are a group of farmers. They basically get together and they start making decisions, and we're trying to go somewhere with this. Now, to help them out in this, the government will step in 1887 in a court case called Wabash versus Illinois. We'll get to that in a second. And we'll set up what's called the Interstate Commerce Commission. It was set up by the Interstate Commerce Act. This basically regulates what goes and comes from interstates. And so it basically, again, took the power away from the states and gave it to the federal. The Hoosier Daddy stuff, right? Remember that? So we have the grangers. They're setting up their party, right? And they're setting up all these things. Now, out of that, the grangers will support former alliances, and eventually they'll call themselves the People's Party. So what the heck is the People's Party? The People's Party is the Populist Party, okay? So first off, get populist. It's the People's Party. It's basically the idea of a political party made up of farmers or people who are like farmers. And that basically means that they want to get more money out to the people, and there was a whole bunch of things, and we'll read those later on. Now, the candidate here, James Weaver, wasn't really interesting, but this woman, I really like to talk about it because she's got one of those quotes that you just want to talk about, all right? Her name is Mary Lease. And as it says here, right, you can see it. Mary Lease advised farmers to, quote, raise less corn and more hell. So she's basically going to say, we're not going to do something unless something else happens. We're not going to keep doing all this until we have these things. She says it's not enough to eat 3 times a day and another man has 25 million. The last man has something that belongs to the first. And so this is the idea of the populace. They want to get money out to people. Everybody has it. Thank goodness this didn't happen because the inflation would have been astronomical. It would have been horrible. But we'll talk about that later on. Now, one thing they did accomplish is they wanted to coin silver. They believed in what was called bimetallism. I believe I left that off. Sure did. So the idea of bimetallism, you can go ahead and put the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. Bimetallism was where you base your monetary standard off 2 metals, not just gold, but also silver. And so Senator Sherman here will pass through what is called the Sherman Silver Purchase Act. And this allowed people to basically get things going to provide for silver. Now, it wasn't at just any free rate, which is what the populace want. It was actually at a different rate, but it did lead to a little bit of the farmers stop belly aching, okay? Now, and so Sherman Silver Purchase Act was about silver, all right? Now, a president comes along and basically says, yeah, do whatever you want. Okay, so President Harrison basically just gives an economic deal with the devil. And so what I mean by that, if you've ever seen the movie Bedazzled, Brendan Fraser wants all these different things, and so he talks to the devil, Elizabeth Hurley, into giving him all these things. And so the idea was, the devil's going to give you what you want, but the consequences will not be what you want. So by the senator giving in and letting all the silver come out and different things like that, they got what they wanted, but the consequences were bad. And we're going to talk about the consequences here in a little while. And it basically led us into a depression, more or less. And later on, it's going to lead to another depression in 1893. Basically, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have everything you want. Rolling Stones said that, right? But we'll leave it there with that.